All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today, tonight, whenever this is coming out. We're recording this ahead of time because we're busy people. And so we want to make sure that these lovely individuals are available for things that actually happen on Wednesday because this Wednesday is Intersex Awareness Day. And we at Trans Family Support Services recognize that we're not the experts when it comes to sharing the stories of the intersex community. And so we wanted to bring a panel together of individuals who could have this conversation with us in its fullness and its depth, and in the most authentic way possible. But out of respect for everyone wanting to be in their own places on the actual day of when you all should be celebrating yourselves and your community, we're recording this ahead of time. So please excuse any technical difficulties. We're all still learning, and it's been a minute since I've seen you all in the live streaming world. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Evan. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I'm the Community and Youth Programming Manager here at Trans Family Support Services, and I will be moderating this panel today. We are joined by three wonderful panelists, as well as our tech support in the background, so you may hear us mentioning them if we are in need of some tech assistance. But for the most part, it'll be these three individuals who are helping us out. So I will call it out on my screen as folks appear, just because that kind of helps the flow be easier. But if you all want to take a second to introduce yourselves, share your name, your pronouns, your identity, and a little bit about, why you're here and a part of this conversation. And we will get started with the first person who shows up on my screen is Val.
Thank you, Evan. Thank you, Trans Family Support Services, for having this conversation today. My name is Val. I use they, them, or she, her pronouns. I am a community member and a co-facilitator of Club Intersex, which is a community-run support group that is facilitated by the Los Angeles LGBT Center. We meet on the first and third Thursday of every month and just provide a space for intersex people to explore and deepen their understanding of intersex identity and experiences and build community. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Val. And I have Tindo next on my screen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tindo, intersex individual, advocate and educator. And I, through my familiarity with Kathy Molig, and was contacted by her about this event, and with Evan moderating. It's good to see Evan again. I've been sort of involved with intersex around the intersex community space since about 2006, when I first started my journey, and have been involved in support group specifically through the diagnosis specific group that was previous sensitivity support group, which is now Interconnect, and is now open and inclusive, identify in all sorts of ways as intersex persons, and have done some speaking here locally in San Diego, has done some interviews, and so just continue our work too. So I appreciate the opportunity. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Thank you, Tindo. And yes, it's been so long since I've seen you. So I'm really happy that you're able to join us today. And then A, if you could introduce yourself.
Hi. So I'm new to this whole scene. I guess. So I'm just here today to just kind of give Lone Ranger info here. Really not really into the community, but here to help with feedback on situations of going alone, I guess, and finding your own information. Here to help future people with their journeys, because it was hard on me. And as an adult going through everything alone, I think it's great that you guys are out here today helping people better themselves, and that's so I'm just here.
Awesome. Well, and it's so important that, you know, that range of experiences is happening and that range of stories is happening, right? Not everyone is going to be able to connect with a support group or an organization like Interact. And so it's important to have folks also who are navigating this journey individually. So I'm glad that all three of you are here and are joining us. So as we're kind of diving into this topic, I know a question that we get asked a lot, you know, when we're doing our sort of education about the LGBTQ community, we kind of talk through some of these letters. And one of the letters that we make a point to address as we're doing education as an organization is I, and intersex. And not a lot of folks have heard the term intersex before, or maybe they've heard some outdated terms that used to be used in reference to intersex individuals. And so as we're starting this conversation and navigating this conversation, I would really love it if we could open it up with, you know, what does intersex mean? And maybe you all have your own definitions that you use for yourselves. Maybe there is, you know, a general definition that you use for the intersex community, and then a more personal definition that you use for yourself, whatever that kind of looks like. I would just love to really kind of ground ourselves in that piece first of really defining, you know, who is the intersex community and what are their stories. So does anyone want to like nominate themselves to go first on defining intersex a little bit? Or I could call.
I can jump in first.
Yeah, thank you, Val.
Yeah. So I'm about to say the 5 words many intersex people will say today on Intersex Awareness Day, which is intersex is an umbrella term, and it refers to a number of different variations that can occur in a person's biology that puts them in this kind of beautiful space outside of the binary of what society or the medical practice deems as male or female. And these variations can occur with respect to an individual's hormone production or how hormones are processed, chromosomes, internal sex organs, genitals, gonads, or secondary sex characteristics like facial and body hair growth, breast development. There's a lot of different variations that fall under this umbrella of intersex. So there are many, many different experiences and types of intersex identities.
Awesome. And then Tindo or A, do either of you want to add on to Val's definition?
That's pretty thorough, but just to say that intersex is something, if you go looking for it, you know, from birth, typically that's observed as atypical. You know, there's an observation of intersex traits right away. In my case, I was born with this. For many people, and maybe that's Val's experience or others, it's not you know known or observable until later in life. We talk about distinguishing differences between intersex and trans identities. It does have certain traits that are observable. And Val pointed, specifically gonadal, chromosomal, anatomical or of hormones in the body, how the body utilizes and manifests that hormonal expression.
Awesome. A, is there anything you would like to add?
Yes, I'm just very onto it about the medical side with it being, chromosomes and everything like that born, it's on paper, it's proof. It's just like, hey, I'm intersex, this is it. And there's no denying it, especially with the medical field, whenever they're like, oh, are you sure? It's right here on paper. So I'm just, when it comes to being intersex and everything like that, you got the paperwork to prove it medically, and so that helps. So that's just where I am on that.
Awesome. Thank you all. So the big difference I'm hearing, and this is, the kind of the pieces that I've gotten to pick up as I've interacted with the intersex community and my work with the gender diverse community, is this piece that intersex is something that is a part of your biology. It is a part of your DNA, your chromosomes. It is an undeniable fact about oneself. But Tindo, you mentioned that it doesn't always present itself visibly when a person is, first born. And so kind of you shared that that's a little bit of your experience. I think you mentioned that it wasn't initially a visible or identifiable fact of your birth. And so kind of what does that conversation look like for individuals? And I guess, if you all are comfortable, as much as you are comfortable talking about it, this piece of how did that journey look like for you, Tindo, because you in particular shared that this wasn't something that it was just a matter of fact, right out the get, this is an intersex individual. So kind of what did that journey look like of figuring out that this is the truth of your anatomy and your DNA and your biology?
Mm-hmm. Sort of briefly, I mean, I was born in 1965 to very, loving parents in the Midwest, and I was born with what does ambiguous anatomy of the genitalia. So I was first in a male name, a legal male name with a birth certificate to go with it. Take too long for my physician father, who was first and foremost a man himself, already had two older brothers, to see that there was a difference in my bodily anatomy. And so, as was typical, loving parents took me to specialists in Chicago, referred to the Children's Hospital there, Children's Memorial Hospital, now Lurie Children's, and was seen by three: a general surgeon, a pediatric urologist, and a pediatric endocrinologist. He determined that it would not be wise for be raised as a boy with the anatomy that I had and the difficulty passing in this life, as male. And so the decision was meant to go ahead and have a gender reassignment that came with surgery, bodily anatomy, and remove the internal testicular gonads, which I did. I did have genetic testing that was done that did determine that I was in fact, quote, it's considered male typical pattern of chromosomes, and basically where it all started. And it wasn't until years later, time of puberty, when I needed to get started on exogenous hormones, because at this point I have hormone producing structures, and so that's where things got started. And along with that narrative, for better or for worse, or to varying degrees, really up until like almost my 40s. So I was kind of a late starter with my journey, but that was when I was like, okay, we need to. And I was, like everything in life, I was late to even get started on the internet. I mean, Evan, for you and A and Evan Aspen behind the scenes, you've out the internet probably, but for us that was like something that came along back, and then I didn't get on the internet until about 1999, and so a nascent community connecting, through various reaching out, and we've all invariably done our own sort of behind the library, actual libraries, and looking up, differences. Well, at that time, it wasn't even differences of sex development, but just looking for anything. Or look, at first, I didn't have my medical records. I was successful in obtaining those, and I was very glad to get those. But there had been various parents about my difference at birth, and that various things were routed and a lot of mystery, and a lot of kind of embarrassment and shame and very conversations. And I didn't have the language to ask the questions that I wanted answers to. And so, as I always say, we can all just evolve. We're all just kind of going along, at the speed of life. And so finally, like I said, about 2003, make contact with someone here in San Diego who the organizer of the very first U.S. support group, which was essentially become the androgen and sensitivity support group of the USA. And that in San Diego, kind of like right under my nose, there was a resource that had always, kind of been here. It took me all those years to find them, but we found them, and then kindly directed me towards a first opportunity to meet in person with other intersex people or persons with intersex traits. And the group that had a yearly summer, conference that was a coming together where people learn about more about the story, more about the history, options that people, had with their hormone choices and aspects of living as an intersex person. So, and then from there, I got involved in support group, running the support group as a board member and starting off, doing sort of early work as an advocate, lending my story to print interviews, and then, present, medical presentations or educational presentations at the college medical, at the medical level. So, and it's just been ongoing. I wouldn't consider myself a serious intersex advocate. I don't have an MD or a PhD after my name. Large, just individual willing to come forward, as I think the power of our important thing. And intersex is still very much closeted and sort of the acronym. And I do believe it belongs there. I think of all the intersex people are essentially, really, or in my case, but in many cases, we're really a graphic group to be discriminated against at a very young age, based upon traits around sex traits or traits that are ascribed to being identity. And so there is a history around, and that without, interventions that these kids may be in tendencies, and that is considered problematic and pathologized. These early interventions to, to supposedly correct, back on a heteronormative path. And we all know at this point this is ridiculous. It's been outlawed as a form of torture, and so what around these intersex surgeries is a form of therapy surgically. So that's where we are. So we're still fighting that fight, and I'll leave it at that for now.
Awesome. Tindo, you actually led me to a really good place, I wanted to mention. So Val, I noticed your shirt. That's End Intersex Surgery, which is incredible. And Tindo kind of touched on it when they were talking a little bit about both their own story and about kind of where this place of advocacy has brought the intersex community. So could you, Val, share a little bit more with us about, what are folks talking about when they're talking about intersex surgeries? What kind of does that conversation look like, and what should it be looking like? And kind of how can allies step in and be a part of moving forward this conversation around ending intersex surgeries?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the End Intersex Surgery is a hashtag that was started by the Intersex Justice Project, which is, a grassroots organization that really wanted to center the voices of Black and Brown intersex people and work to hold the medical practice accountable for the harms that are perpetrated on intersex bodies in the name of normalizing naturally occurring variations that actually don't need fixing. So the term intersex surgery can refer to any number of procedures which are done to outward genitalia that in most cases are cosmetic in nature, meaning they have no actual medical function or purpose other than to make the individual's body more closely align with heteronormative expectations of male and female anatomy. And, you know, people might be familiar with or may have heard of like female genital mutilation, for example, as a concept of, you know, maybe they learned about it in an anthropology class, or they're, you know, they think of it as this, you know, kind of cultural practice that's, you know, but actually that's what intersex surgery is. It's the same thing. It's genital mutilation to correct, quote unquote, intersex bodies. And this often happens on very young infants or younger patients, and at an age where they are actually unable to give informed consent. And that's one of the main issues that's kind of, you know, under the banner of intersex advocacy, is working to just kind of sound the alarm on this, because it's an ongoing human rights violation and crisis that demands attention and action, because these surgeries still happen every day. They're completely normalized in most cases. Depending on the individual's variation and presentation, sometimes, you know, there are certain risks that are presented by the doctor that, you know, the parent will take, and, you know, they're overstated in some contexts. So using my example of my variation is complete androgen insensitivity, or CAIS, androgen insensitivity syndrome, being one of the main, or one of the more common variations. There's partial androgen insensitivity, complete androgen insensitivity. And with that variation, I have XY chromosomes, but I was assigned female at birth because my body presents in a female fashion. And it wasn't actually, mine's one of those variations that wasn't detected until I was older, because I didn't have a normal, quote unquote, puberty. And so that's how I was diagnosed. Was I was getting a sports physical to play field hockey in high school. And the nurse asked date of last menstruation, and I said never. And that just kind of set off a whole string of visits. And eventually I found out. But the variation I have, there's this procedure that's frequently done called a gonadectomy, where there are sometimes partially developed undescended, you know, testes or gonads that can, in certain instances, I am not a medical person, like Tindo said, I'm not a medical person, I'm not a doctor. My understanding from other intersex advocates is that the risk of cancer is very low, but oftentimes, and as was the case in my experience, it's not always framed that way, that it's a low risk. It's like, these things could be cancerous, we got to take them out, you know? So it's this idea that this variation in your body is actually a risk to your health, and we need to change it. Is this kind of narrative of your body is wrong, we need to fix it, let us get in there and cut this out. So I think, to your question of how, you know, how does the conversation need to look, I think we just need to educate medical providers, surgeons, to know that these variations are natural and normal, and that we need to delay these surgeries to the extent that they're not medically necessary, so that people can have the opportunity to live in their bodies and decide for themselves if that's something they want. Because oftentimes what happens is these surgeries don't fix anything. They actually make the bodies worse. They can result in, you know, loss of, you know, sexual sensation, incontinence, UTIs, psychological, emotional trauma, and sometimes requiring follow-up repair surgeries. And so it's just a really terrible practice. And that's just one of the issues that intersex people face.
Awesome. Thank you, Val, for such a thorough answer. And what I'm kind of hearing is the common theme between your story and Tindo's story is that once a person is identified as having an intersex variation or as being a part of the intersex community, it sounds like you get kind of thrust into this world with many medical professionals kind of descending upon you at once. And like, here are all the things we need to do to like fix your body. And it sounds like, Val, that's not really what best practice should be, and that medical practitioners should, you know, maybe take a minute and pump on the brakes and say, well, what does this person want? And in Tindo's case, I mean, you mentioned you were younger, right? Your dad noticed kind of right away that your anatomy wasn't the same as what another assigned male person's anatomy would look like, and the decision was kind of made for you pretty early that it wouldn't be, I think you said it wouldn't be beneficial for you to be raised male, and that it would be more beneficial for you to be raised female. I think that's what you mentioned. Correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, correct. I mean, in general, medical authority sort of placed a lot of value on, you know, absolute function. That the anatomy must look correctly, or a child will not that gender assignment. Nor there was also the concern that parents wouldn't bond, you know, in a normal, loving way. So that the parents needed to have clarity that they were raising either a boy or a girl, and that a child with their own, you know, of their own, you know, gender identity based upon anatomy. And like, you know, how will a child navigate, you know, going to school and being around other peers, locker, you know, and things of this nature. So yes, in my case, I was, you know, that is a narrative that is common for, you know, for many intersex people, but not for everybody. And you know, you can imagine that once that decision is made, point is that going to be questioned. And so, you know, what motivation did my to sort of present that to me later in life? You know, there's a lot of social shame, you know, around issues of sexuality, and certainly no parent one is a, you know, is a freak or a freak of nature, or something, you know, that with Buddhism and bullying. And so it takes, you know, the individual to sort of say, this, you know, something is definitely, you know, amiss here. And that sort of, like I said, began my self-discovery, which admittedly was a little bit later in life. I knew about it. Certainly I knew aspects of my reality, and but it was when that was took charge of it myself, wanting to get my records, wanting to find community, wanting to take decisions around my hormonal choices, and you know, if, you know, any other bodily modifications or whatever, that would be something that I would pursue. And so that's what I did, starting kind of in my early 40s.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tindo. I just wanted to hop on over to you, and you know, we've heard a little bit about Val and about Tindo's stories, and you mentioned earlier, you know, that you are kind of coming into it from that medical perspective, right? Of that's kind of where your interest lays, right, in the medical aspect of an intersex identity. So if you wanted to share a little bit about, you know, this piece of intersex surgeries and I mean, this overwhelming practice that is still going on, right? And that acknowledgement that this is something that is still happening to individuals by medical practitioners who maybe think that this is good intention, think that this is best practice. But like we're learning today in this conversation, or maybe we've known, is that is just not the reality. So if you wanted to share anything about that kind of line of thought.
Yes, I mean, Val and Tindo, they made very, you know, valid points and everything with, you know, parents deciding what's beneficial, and doctors, you know, talking about, oh, what they deem medically necessary. Like in my case, being born, you know, I didn't know until later on when I got out of the military that I was intersex. So my parents made the decision, which it took, some time to adjust to that, thought process, and had to think, well, what were they thinking when they made that decision? And the doctor as well, because it wasn't up to me to make that decision as to how I wanted to live my life. If I wanted to live as male or female, being born with XXY chromosomes and anatomy, that's different than others, the doctor deemed what they deemed medically necessary, because usually what the doctor does is they take whichever one is more prominent and they go, okay, this one's a boy, or, this person's a girl, without even allowing that child to develop and grow up and make that decision for themselves. And I think that's the biggest thing that we run into is the parents are like, we don't want our kid to be picked on or bullied, or these are our ideologies or beliefs. So, you know what, this is what our child's going to be. Or the doctor, saying, well, medical reasons, they're going to be this. So I think that they both, made very valid points as to that. And that is kind of what happened in my case growing up is my parents and doctors made that decision for me. And growing up as a child, and being confused about who you are and your chromosomes and, everything, you're going through puberty and it's different than all the other girls. And you're like, well, why is my puberty different than them? Why do I feel this way? And then when you find out, you're like, all your answers are right there. And I think that if you tell your kid or are there for your kid when they're younger, I think that can really help out. I think the doctors need to maybe slow down on making choices, so do the parents, and kind of let this child develop and then go from there and say, okay, this is my son, or hey, this is my daughter. Because in my case, I was their daughter. And luckily now, that I'm older, they're finally accepting me as their son, and they're realizing, hey, we're sorry, we did that. We just wanted to do what was best for you, and that's the thing. It's not always malicious. Whenever, doctors or parents do this, they're looking out for their kids. And so maybe instead of making that decision, wait, just hold back a bit. So that's where I got on that. So
Awesome. I really appreciate it. And I'm so grateful that we're able to have this conversation and that we were able to coordinate this conversation to happen, because I think, this is one of those pieces where when we're doing education and we're talking about the intersex community, often it's kind of asked, like, is the intersex community a part of the transgender community, right? And are is this another overlap to this community of like gender diverse individuals? And I think it's what's becoming more clear to me as we all are talking is that, maybe right. Val, I think you mentioned, intersex being an umbrella term. We talk about the trans community in the same way, as transgender is an umbrella term that a lot of people are going to interpret uniquely to their own experiences. And what I'm hearing as the common themes are these pieces of an individual's autonomy and their ability to decide what happens to their own body. And oftentimes our children or our youth not being allowed to make those decisions for themselves. And I'm kind of hearing that as the two similar themes of the intersex and the trans communities. I wanted to hop in with you really quickly, since you mentioned that you didn't know this about yourself until after you left the military. Val had mentioned that this was something that had come up as they were going through a physical at school. And so was there things that happened, as you were growing up where your parents kind of stepped in and they took authority in situations so that they would like shield you from this information, or kind of how did that look growing up?
So I'm gonna try to be as vague as possible, because I had a very rough upbringing, um, and the sense of that, of course, lots of therapy growing up. They shielded it from me. Like growing up, I'd be very tiny and be like, "Oh, my pee pee" or whatever, and they're like, "No, no, no, you're a girl, honey, you're a girl." Lots of therapy, some shock therapy, other things that were allowed when growing up, to be like, hey, no, you're a girl, you're a girl. Um, and so growing up, they were very adamant about that, female hormones and other things, Girl Scouts, eh, all the above, ballerina, let's girls, girls, girls. But no matter how far they pushed me, I still kind of like football, sports, the guys. Um, and then, being 18 on your own, I'm like, okay, I'm out. I'm going to find myself military. When I went to the military, they do all the testing, blood work, you get your shots. So they give you a full physical. They're like, hey, by the way, did you know you're intersex? And I'm just like, I'm what? And then it was a lot of Googling and like, oh my goodness, like I'm not a woman, I'm not a lesbian, I'm not. And then all that identity that I had growing up in high school just was like, wait, I'm not all this. I'm just, I'm me. Like, and so now just straight male, I'm male, identify as male, straight. And, to me, it was just eye opening and this world's so. But yeah, so my parents clouded me from that, and then military just was like, hey, this is who you are. And then it's from there, it's been me doing all the research, finding out all the information, uh, going and seeing my doctor and being like, hey, this is it. And they told me, when I was a child that I was there, in that facility for the therapy and everything for the gender conforming and all that. And I was like, wow. So it's a lot of stuff that I had regressed and put away that they brought up. So yeah.
And now it's like you mentioned, it's all these other layers, right? Not just within gender identity, but also it impacts things like your sexual orientation and having to kind of re-go through a coming out process with yourself. And I can imagine that felt very overwhelming. And then you add on to it the piece of my medical history is not what I thought it was. Thank you for sharing that. And I really appreciate it. And just so we can like make it so incredibly clear, this practice, is it legal, right? This piece of, intersex genital mutilation or intersex surgery is performed on minors. Like, is this something that is currently legal in the United States? Is this a state by state thing? Val, if you could share with us a little bit about, kind of what does this piece look like on that legislative piece?
Yeah, I mean, it is, I mean, whether or not I think it should be outlawed. I mean, it is, these surgeries have been condemned by the United Nations, by Human Rights Watch. There are a couple of countries that have actually stepped up to ban these. Greece recently passed a law to ban these surgeries. But it is absolutely something that still happens in every state. There are certain, it is more of a state by state thing in that certain states or even like counties or regions can pass local, ordinances that denounce these surgeries, or in some cases, actually, I don't know if they're actually, I'm not a policy expert, but I don't believe there's any actual like bans as such by law for these surgeries. There was Intersex Justice Project, this activist group, successfully protest at one hospital in particular, Lurie Children's Hospital, which I think Tindo mentioned. And over the course of, a number of years, by having these like demonstrations, were successful in getting Lurie's to change their policies. And actually in 2020, they announced that they were stopping certain surgeries and working with intersex, community members to I'm sorry, Tindo?
Oh, Val, you froze for a second.
Oh, hopefully I'm back. I apologize. Yeah. Yeah. So that's, I mean, yeah, the surgeries are still ongoing and there's no ban. I think at this point, the biggest we're just trying to get people aware of this, because in the wake of these, many bills that are passing right now addressing transgender people and healthcare, I'm sure the viewers of this are aware that, there's bills that will outlaw surgeries being performed on minors when, that's not part of gender affirming care for, anyone under 18. However, these surgeries do occur on intersex children. So these bills, some of them will actually include specific, statutory exemptions that carve out the ability to perform. So they'll say no surgeries for children, even though transgender children are receiving surgeries. But, in this instance, it's acceptable. So, that's just a little bit about the legality of this and where it sits currently.
That's something that is very interesting to note, of that piece, right? Of when we're looking at what does this mean legislatively, and especially in those cases of states where they are trying to ban access to gender affirmation care for trans individuals, does that also mean that they're going to ban things like, forced intersex surgeries on intersex individuals? And it's no, that's not what it means at all. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Val. And I remember seeing a couple of years ago when Laurie Children's Hospital came forward with their new policy and their new statement, and that was an incredible win for the intersex community from what I was seeing on social media. So that piece of these grassroots organizations, hey, we could do something sometimes, and sometimes we make an impact. Tindo, we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier before we started recording, and Val brought it up a little bit in regards to legislation that is working against the trans community and is actively in that process also writing anti-intersex legislation as well, with this piece of surgeries and medical transition. What's that look like for legislation like what's happening in California, with California being a sanctuary state for trans youth and their families who are trying to access gender affirmation care? What does that world also look like for our intersex community, if there is any overlap at all?
Yeah, great question. That's complicated and very, very nuanced. And it's sort of what Val was answering previously. Part of the problem is medical authority is still saying, "Oh yeah, we understand intersex. We've heard intersex advocates. Intersex. We're talking about real, true medical crises," and they focus on one particular intersex trait called congenital adrenal hyperplasia, which are human beings with XX chromosomes and ovaries and uteruses, particular enzyme and metabolic difference that causes a masculine anatomy. And so they're saying these are not intersex individuals. These are, otherwise, and they have a need to have a body that is more in line with their. And so that is a really big component, and a very large intersex persons. I mean, I define them as intersex, and that's part of the problem with the intersex movement. A very large component or demographic of our community is not identifying, and so that created a problem with the legislation, and specifically here in California, backed by medical lobbying groups that also had the support of around this particular intersex trait, CAH, where they felt weren't intersex identified. They don't believe their daughters are intersex. They just need to have these corrective surgeries that align them with their gender identity. And so that was that we're trying to make the argument with legislators here in California, these interventions were actually damaging, and that they're not based on personal, which is a human right, and really, a constitutional right. And so these legislators, many of them very unfamiliar with issues around LGBT community, many of them coming from agricultural districts, in California, on these subcommittees where they are expected to render decision for that, and they're like, well, these doctors are, we have to trust them about, and they seem loving and compassionate with their care. We've decided against the the protection, these protective bills, they also gave testimony that they don't support it. So someone to, it's like taking my word versus theirs, and so a couple of cases, not the CAH case is one, and there's also a situation anatomy that's very different. They have genital anatomy that's different, and medical lobby that does a lot of they're urologists that do a lot of the quote unquote rip boys, and they had a lot of power to legislators to at least reconsider it, and so basically it got to a stalemate where the Senator Scott Wiener from San Francisco built the legislative take it off the docket because it just didn't have the support. I'd like to think that California would be a state that would get it, and if we have a governor that did a blanket statement making California a sanctuary state for transgender kids, which I think is, we have to have some kind of blanket of judgment against these these surgeries, very few where there might be a medical emergency that needs to be addressed, but that otherwise it's a violation of constitutional rights, and that just needs to the point where that is just clearly understood. I mean, to me, it's pretty slam dunk, but living that experience, and so I'm just hoping that future legislative, has to be more successful in making that argument and being successful at convincing legislation to move forward with it. And I think we will get there. It's just going to take a little more time.
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds like, it's very much this piece where there's a lot of gray areas, right? With the intersex community, maybe not all individuals with intersex traits identifying within the intersex community, and then that creates weird loopholes that these, surgeons and urologists can kind of weave through of, oh no, this is best practice because this is what folks are telling us, right? So it's incredibly nuanced, and I
war, going on within our own ranks, and it's not helpful. But
yeah, just to jump in on that, something A said earlier kind of brought this to my mind. On October 24th, as people are watching this, there was this seminar that was held called Med Ed and Student Organizing for Intersex Justice, which was presented by Sean Saifawal, one of the co-founders of Intersex Justice Project, and Hans Lindahl, who is an intersex, educator. And Hans had this segment of the presentation talking about the term intersex, and that it's actually, to the point of whether or not folks identify as intersex. I was actually never given that word by a doctor. I found that word through, the internet, through the magic of social media. But there's also this term that's used in the medical setting that's called DSD, either differences of sex development or disorders of sex development. And one thing that Hans pointed out was that sometimes these two, labels can be a bit used differently because some folks don't feel comfortable or want to necessarily be part of the LGBTQIA, umbrella. I guess that's a theme for today, right? So there could even be safety concerns. That was another thing Hans pointed out. Some regions, there are actually laws against, certain, identities. And so, the term intersex itself is kind of something that's still, we're all kind of together as a community, like having dialogue about this word and what it means to us and whether or not it feels right for folks. And
That's awesome. And I really appreciate both of you, Tindo and Val, stepping in and addressing that, because I think it's one of those pieces where, we're so and so frequently, when we're talking about supporting the trans and gender diverse community, there is that conversation of, well, like, what are the actual definitions of these identities, right? With the non-binary community, with the transgender community. Is a non-binary person transgender? And it's very much this piece of individuals have their own safety and comfort levels with the language, right? And so somebody may identify as having differences in sexual development and not identify as intersex because of those pieces. So I really appreciate you both bringing that up. So we are coming close to the end of our time together. And so I want to switch gears for a second. I want to talk resources for a second, because there's been a lot of things that we've thrown at folks in regards to, some of the organizations and the grassroots advocacy movements that are happening for the intersex community. But if y'all want to hop in and just, we could start at A and kind of work counterclockwise of some resources that you have found helpful, not just for the intersex community, but also for allies to this community who are looking to learn more and support this movement and community, whether that be through advocacy on their own or support at these sorts of demonstrations and movements like what happened with Laurie Children's Hospital, whatever that sort of looks like. So I don't know if you, it's kind of a tough one to be put on the spot for and be the first one to answer, but if you have any resources, books, or anything that's helped you as you've kind of gone through this journey that you would recommend to either another intersex person or somebody who's looking to better support this community.
So first and foremost, just, when it comes to insurance and everything like that, there's different policies out there for different states and everything like that. Me, I was lucky enough, I have federal insurance. So if you can get a federal job, do it, because they can't fire me for being who I am. There's laws in that, whereas states in Florida, it's right to work. So I've been fired from a lot of jobs because of that. So I lose the insurance. I would lose, so being federal, I get the federal insurance, which covers. And when picking my plan, Blue Cross Blue Shield, they are very great with it. I've had them since I was a kid. And they cover a lot of transgender, intersex, and everything like that in their policy. So I know Starbucks, I've had a friend that was telling me Starbucks has really good insurance for that as well. So when you're looking at jobs, you're looking at insurance, try to look at what it says it covers, what it helps with, because mine helps with the, gender converting back, taking care of what it's fixing. So it fixes that. So I have to pay very little, and they're very great. At first, when I called in, they were like, okay, so what do you want to be referred to and everything. So when it comes to insurance, jobs, everything with your transitioning or, anything that may be, try to do your research on that, because that's what I did. I didn't really have support groups or anything like that. This is the first time I'm actually being a part of anything that really pertains to LGBT, and so for me, really, it's just Google's your best friend. Try to your state, the laws, where to work, and insurance, and you'll be great. So.
Hopefully.
Pro tip for folks who are in the intersex and trans community: hey, apparently federal jobs do a solid thing. They work out pretty well, and I have also heard that about Starbucks having pretty solid insurance for folks looking to transition. At least I've heard in the trans community, and it's reassuring to hear that that's also the experience of folks in the intersex community. It's awesome. Tindo, is there anything that you would share resource wise?
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, we're talking about resources. So, I was with an intersex individual, like I said, locally, that I just found through, an internet search, and that led me to a support group and contact. Intersex people invariably report that the most important aspect is meeting another intersex person, and so having that opportunity connected to someone else who's intersex, and hopefully someone that you identify that they sort of share a similar intersex trait, because there is a lot of variation. Getting back to the argument why some people don't want to identify with the, being QIA community because they feel like, well, that's not them. They're not queer. They're straight. They just have this difference. So I think sometimes, meeting the right person towards a person who would probably be a good first person to contact with. So, and then if they're inclined, your local LGBT center. I'm up here up in North County in San Diego, and I've been very fortunate that the LGBT center, the resource center, was very willing to take on. And we're like, yeah, that is something that we would like to champion, and to the extent that their resources, or at least to shed light and awareness and visibility to intersex issues, finding contact through a search, and then the national group that I referenced, that a network of intersex people, of professional clinicians and members that come together, not just yearly for an annual convention, but throughout the year, to be in contact. Val, and she co-facilitates one of those groups that's a newer group, twice a month, to sort of touch base and share what they're going through, get resources, get advice, rant and share a victory. There's a lot out there, but to A's point, that the government has provided good insurance, so maybe the government could provide some protection, so we won't need to have good insurance to deal with the aftermath. We'd actually be protected, and so that's the work that I'm hoping to see that will come, and it will come. There's a lot of resources out there, and people just need to get whatever it is that gets them started should be directed toward resources. If they go to a doctor, a doctor should be able to offer them, I'm going to do some research and find a group for you to have another patient that might be, obviously they have to go through HIPAA protection of still giving out other information, but that network is possible. Self and perhaps Val and others will say, yeah, if anybody ever comes in that wants to meet, or if you're an intersex person, I am totally okay with you, make me and take it from there. So I'll leave it at that. But there.
Awesome. And I'm hearing, this resounding piece, Tindo, of connecting with your community, right? Finding other intersex individuals who you can grieve and celebrate and vent and all of the things too. So Val, what are some resources, and your support group was mentioned by Tindo, but what are some of the resources that you would pass along?
Yeah, so I think I saw a button for Interconnect, which is the, it's a support group. They have different types too. They have like a BIPOC hangout and support group. They have one for parents. They have one for, intersex youth, which is amazing. And then there's also, I would say, Interact Advocates, or interact.org, I believe is the other one. interactadvocates.org, which is it's a nonprofit that does a lot of like policy and advocacy work, but they also have some great like education. Like if you're intersex, they have little pamphlets that you can take to the doctor's office so that you can like hand this to a nurse and say, hey, read this, so I don't have to give you all the information about what you need to think about when providing me healthcare, because that's something we didn't even scratch the surface of, which is another big issue intersex people face, which is the quality of care, the terrible quality of care often. So Interact has a lot of great literature on that front. I've mentioned Intersex Justice Project as one of those advocacy groups. They have a lot of like they have like toolkits on how to organize locally. They have like press about their different actions. I just want to shout out also like Instagram, just like following intersex individuals or groups For example, I co-facilitate at Club Intersex on Instagram, which is provided by the LA LGBT Center. And, just listening to other people who are intersex, there's so many different voices, and, they will also share organizations that you can learn from. But I think A said it best, Google's your friend. Just literally type in intersex and see what comes up, just learn about, because obviously sex education, anatomy, biology, physiology, these courses don't really present that to us. So it's, the onus is kind of on us to do that research.
Awesome. I really appreciate it. I know we're running a little bit over time, but there's one question that I always like to end these on, because I think it's a good tone to end on. What is something that brings you joy in your identity, in who you are, whether that be related to your advocacy as an intersex person, whether that be related to your family, to your community, whatever that looks like? What brings you joy in this sense of your identity? And someone could just take that one and start on that, and then we can hop.
Hey, you got it? You going?
I'll go.
I'll go.
So I'm honestly, I'm finding more lately, more proud of myself, I guess you could say. Being who I am, I'm unique and I should be proud of that. And, I mentioned the federal, but, going in, I've had struggles with the federal government and people with the discrimination and, oh, you're female, you're male. No, like, this is who I am. And I've had to stand my ground. And, it's the first time, because I've passed my whole life, but now that you're in there, they have all your paperwork and your documents. So they're right in your face about who you are on paper. And it's like, okay, cool, but this is who I am. So I think, my biggest thing, it's helped me confidence in who I am and who I am as a person, and be more, willing to be more of an advocate for people. Because there was an instance at work, not going to get into it, but there's an instance at work and it happened to me and it happened to somebody else, and I stepped up for that person because I don't want to see what I've gone through happen to other people. So I'm proud to be who I am, and so me being intersex, I'm here to help the community, and it makes me feel better, like that, just being intersex, so I'm here to help both females, males, whoever, whatever you want to go by, whatever your pronouns, whatever, I'm here, as a person. So that's what it means to me, that I'm.
I love it. I love it. That piece of like self-healing through doing this work in advocacy for others. Awesome. Tindo.
Sounds like a new advocate. Yeah, I will just word off of that. I think for me, being intersex is, there's a real spiritual component talked about that much, but I'm a person of faith. Tradition tells me that I am, definitely I have purpose. I'm confident that, these things are not, I'm not outside the universe. I'm a part of this scene, and that there's in my existence and the way that I came into this world, and it's not something that is fixed. I don't want to diminish cases where there might be some medical emergency that a life or death sustaining decision. In most cases, it's not. To align myself with the fact that the universe wants, and I'm here to use my story to hopefully do some good in advocacy. I've been doing it now for going on shy 20 years in various forms. Goes on, and so to connect with that, and to connect with community that's embracing, believes in welcoming, and believes in diversity, is an important in my own ongoing intersection journey. So I'll leave it at that.
Awesome. And Val, toss it to you.
Yeah, for me, it's the community, like 100%. That's where I find joy, is being together with other people who have shared the experience, because I think we touched on it earlier, growing up feeling like a freak, feeling like an alien, feeling like no one understands what you're going through, but also not having, in some cases, the language to really nail down what that is. But then finding that space, finding those people who see you and who understand and can, you know, support you and lift you up. And that's just been like the best. It's been transformative to really find other intersex people and just relate to them, or, you know, like A was saying, help affirm them and, you know, feel like a mutual kind of like benefit from that. So yeah, that's it for me.
Awesome. Awesome. I am so grateful to the three of you for joining us today. And I'm so grateful, Aspen, for your behind the scenes work and throwing up all those links, because there are lots of things to click and lots of resources to grab and lots of things to learn. And it sounds like, and Val, you mentioned it, you know, when you were wrapping up a second ago of this piece of, there's tons of things we didn't even touch with this conversation that absolutely deserve spots. So maybe we can revisit this conversation another day, and the three of you would be available to join us for another conversation and live stream about the intersex community and what more can be done from our organization and from others who also want to be supporting this community. So I appreciate you three so much. Thank you so much for your time, and for hanging out with me while we talked a little bit about intersex community and intersex visibility and what that means and why it is so important to keep advocating for this community. So thank you all again, and have a great night. Have a great rest of your day, your week, wherever you are. And thanks. Yeah.
Thanks so much.